Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of Lombardi Time Brews, where I'm your host, John Delray. Decided to hop on live today. It is still like a research based episode, but still thought I would hop on live. Had some stuff come up today. Didn't want to wait to actually post it and wait for YouTube and all that jazz. So, little different structure today, but I do have a number of things to talk about. One is a light recap of the game yesterday. The reason why it's a light recap is because basically you could go to the recaps of the last couple games and just copy and paste because it's much the same issues that led to their ultimate demise against Minnesota yesterday. But first, the big news of the day would be that edge player Sean Gary has been locked up now in a 4-year, $96 million of new money contract, brand new extension for Rashawn Gary. So it is top 5 edge money. But from the Packers side of things, it also is pretty well structured because it only has a $34 million signing bonus. So you're looking at something like 34% of it, roughly, guaranteed over the life of the contract, which comes in generally under where the Packers like to do their contracts. So Rashawn Gary, on some level, also betting on himself to continue ascend through the rest of the contract. So great news for Green Bay that they were able to come to agreement and lock up their budding superstar at the edge position. So I want to talk about yesterday, right? And the way I'm going to do this isn't just like this overall total recap. I'm not going to dive into specific plays or anything. I'm just going to talk about the keys to the game that I listed in the preview video and then see whether they adhered to those plays of the game or keys of the game or not. Number one, Jordan Love had to beat the blitz because Minnesota blitzes a ton, and indeed they did. So did he beat the blitz? And this is like the one key where I can confidently say, hey, the Packers did it. Because not against the blitz, Jordan Love was 12 of 22 for 126 yards and his one interception. But against the blitz, he was 12 of 19, 104 yards, and one touchdown. They did it. They accomplished one key. But moving on to key number 2, the Packers needed to keep their sack evasion going, meaning Jordan Love not going down, while reversing the Vikings trend and actually bring down Kirk Cousins. Well, unfortunately, in that regard, they did the polar opposite. Jordan Love was sacked 4 times. Kirk Cousins, while he was in, sacked only twice. And given the fact that Kirk Cousins is a master of death by 1,000 paper cuts, if you were going to pressure him, you had to actually finish the pressure and bring him down. And we saw the end result of just executing again and again and again against the Packers ultralight zone, which, yeah, we're going to be talking about in just a second. Key number 3 was Matt LaFleur having to give up some form of control. And for a few brief glimpses, they actually did it. They moved to no huddle and they experienced success. Like there was a nice 3 to 4 play stretch there where it was really successful. And then I think they experienced success. They got scared and they derailed it right away. And then finally, when the game was pretty well decided at 24-10, you did see the Packers really open it up. In the last 6-7 plays there, Love was just shooting for the stars, throwing it deep. So finally, we saw the playbook open up. It was just too little, too late. Matt LaFleur ultimately just stuck to his script in the first half. And the Packers stuck to the execution problems that we have seen again and again and again. It's just exhausting at this point. Plus, I'm going to throw in here too, the wide receivers. That was some of the worst wide receiver play for the Green Bay Packers that honestly I've probably ever seen in the years that I've been watching the Packers. And we've talked about in the last couple of weeks, the wrong routes, even the lackadaisical route running at times, or not fighting for a deep ball. But yesterday, Matt LaFleur said in his post-game press conference that he had at least 6 drops off the top of his head. Today in his press conference, turns out it was actually more than that. Plus, we did see repeatedly, especially from individuals like Christian Watson, who should be, by all accounts, an athletic specimen, just not fighting for the ball. The Jaden Reed interception where the safety plucked it away. And yes, you can talk about ball placement on several of these plays, but also the wide receivers weren't exactly helping their young quarterback either. And against the Minnesota cornerbacks, which by most metrics are fairly deficient, it really was inexcusable. According to Zach Cruz on Twitter, he's the senior editor for Packers Wire. He put out that the Packers yesterday were 0 for 7 on contested catch opportunities. On the season, they've only caught about 21% of their contested catch opportunities. The NFL average sits around 40%. Watson and Reed, to this point in the season, they're a combined 0 for 15 when it comes to contested catches. And yes, Jordan Love has accuracy problems. I'm not denying it. But at the same time, with a quarterback who hasn't played much, you do want receivers who are going to be willing to help their quarterback out and fight for the ball. We just haven't seen it outside of really Romeo Doubs, who even had some of his own problems yesterday. And then defensively, the Green Bay Packers' last key was close the zones. Did they do that? No, not even a little. The zones yesterday were massive. In fact, I think that they played farther back and more spread out than they generally even do. There was one instance where the Packers only rushed 2, dropped 9 into coverage, and still the Vikings had a wide receiver streaking open across the middle of the field. They did go man occasionally, except most of the time when they went man is when Jordan Addison was against Jair, and Jair got beat. So we're going to be talking about Jair in just a minute. Don't worry, we're going to get there. But terrible day coverage-wise defensively. Overall, with Cousins in, the Vikings converted over 50% of their 3rd and 8 situations. Like, you did the job, right? On 1st and 2nd down, you got them into 3rd and long. That's been the Packers' problem forever. Performing well on 1st and 2nd down to get them to 3rd and long. Yesterday, they did it a bunch. But then the problem is, once you got them to 3rd and 8, they converted over 50% of those. And some of them weren't even that close. So what's the point of actually performing on 1st and 2nd down if you're just going to hand them 3rd down anyway? So a lot of difficulties. One thing I can say about coverage, like, just let this stat linger in your mind. Preston Smith yesterday, with that one play along the goal line, had more pass breakups than Jair and Razul combined. Combined, they had 0. Preston Smith had 1. Yikes, y'all. Just a rough outing. One positive note for the defense that I can say this: only 7 missed tackles yesterday. That's an improvement compared to the last couple of weeks. So that's something. So now, I will take a minute here. Let's just dive into a couple of comments, and then I'm going to start talking trade deadlines. So, Jeff, I see you're here. Hello, Jeff, Packers fan 12. Nice to see you. Tyler, nice to see you as well. Let's see. Tyler says, Gary extension. I like expending him, but I don't like the number they did it at. Not productive enough compared to the others that get paid about the same, and he can't set the age in the run game. Yeah, Tyler, I agree. Like, the next evolution for Rashawn is he has to become like Max Crosby, like Myles Garrett, and become an effective run stopper, which we really do have yet to see from Rashawn. The only point that I personally would kind of split hairs with is in terms of productivity. When you look at his pressure numbers, when you look at his overall disruption, it is in the category of these elites. The one area where it doesn't is ultimately sacks. But according to the Packers' own methodology of assessing pass rushers, they value the totality of the picture even more than they do just the actual sack. So, of course, they rank him as one of the most elite in the NFL. I understand I understand where you're coming at. He does have to get better as a run edge defender. But yeah, and keep in mind too that there's these contracts are always a little future proof, right? Like Rashawn Gary probably only agreed because it is curbing against inflation in that edge market a little, because the next one is going to be even higher than Rashawn's. I'm just glad they didn't get up to Bosa money with Rashawn Gary. So, and then I see some other stuff. Tyler also saying, did GB set Love up to fail? Almost go too young. Should have kept a Lewis type at tight end and a Lazard type at wide receiver. Yeah. The simple answer, yeah. I mean, like, they came into the year almost expecting their 4th-year quarterback to be the old guy, right? Their guy who had barely ever played before. Yeah, he was 4th year, but they expected him to be the one to correct everybody else. And that's foolhardy. the Packers at the same time, maybe they expected this more than we did. Matt LaFleur saying you need to temper expectations. Brian Gutekunst talking about opportunities for growth. All of these conversations were had in August. Then we experienced week one and we saw the preseason where, Love was performing well and adequately. And yeah, I think we built up our own expectations too high. But to be totally answer this question here, did they set him up to fail? Yeah, probably. But even more worrisome from my spot, they set it up so that they can't get an honest assessment of their potentially franchise quarterback. Because how do you assess Jordan Love without competent wide receiver play? Part of the rationale for hanging on to Aaron Jones and David Bakhtiari during a pseudo rebuild was, well, we got to give him a run game and we got to protect him. Well, we've seen how that's gone. So again, how do you assess a young QB when you've got deficient wide receivers, a deficient run game, and deficient pass protection? It gets tough. How do you even know what you have at the position besides just saying, was that throw on target? Yes or no? And of course, assessing a quarterback is a lot more evolved of a question than that. Peter, hello, bonjour, Peter. Hi, John. Kirk Cousins' ending season was by far the saddest news. He turns out to be such a nice guy in the Netflix quarterbacks documentary. Yeah, you never want to root for that, but that's a devastating loss to a team that was really beginning to turn it around in Minnesota. Scott, hey, John, hope all is well. Missed the watch party. Hey, Scott, there was no watch party yesterday. That was my week off to watch a game with the dad, so you did not miss a thing. All right, so I do want to get to the rest of the stuff. Maybe I'll hop back onto comments after this, but I do want to talk trade deadline. So tomorrow, with the trade deadline occurring, if the Packers make some big move, I'll hop on. But for all intents and purposes, I'm going to explain why it's probably going to be a fairly quiet day tomorrow. Thus far, there have been continued reports. Jay Glazer, Peter Bukowski, individuals around the game have said that GB is potentially still angling to try to get a veteran offensive presence to really help stabilize things around the team. And I'll say this, if the Packers are going to spend an asset on a player, if they're going to be buyers at all, it better be one of two things. One, it's got to be a dirt cheap, older vet who you want to bring in as a teacher, maybe someone who can stabilize things so that they can get a more honest assessment of Love. Or it's got to be someone who you are immediately factoring in to the long-term plans of the franchise, like I believe trading for Jonathan Taylor would have been. If the Packers would have pulled off that trade, certainly Taylor would have gotten a contract. Certainly he would be the running game of the future, right? If the Packers see an opportunity where they can secure a position for multiple years, then they may jump on that. And that's really the two places that I can see making an actual buying type move at the deadline tomorrow. More likely, though, we may see a player sold, Packers collecting assets for one of their veteran contracts. But again, a lot of contingencies here. If the players are being sold, there's a few things to consider. One, are they desirable by other teams? Two, what's the return? Are they more valuable to the Packers or more valuable elsewhere? And three, what is the immediate financial ramification of moving that contract? Keep in mind, several of the veterans for the Green Bay Packers are currently in contracts where money's been pushed forward, which means a lot of these dead cap numbers are really, really unfriendly to move before the contract expires. So if the Packers are going to trade anyone, keep in mind that they would do so for four reasons. One, they're going to clear future money. It's advantageous financially to move on from them. Two, they're going to move an older, fading veteran so that a younger guy can get more snaps and play more. Three, the return is absolutely exceptional. They're bowled away by what the return may be. Or four, they're just straight up not a part of the contention window next year, or maybe more realistically, 2025, as eyes begin to turn to the future. And what I mean by that is if it's a guy on an expiring contract who the Packers have no intention of retaining, might as well move them for something, right? So keeping that in mind, I put in the thumbnail of this video that there's not many sell candidates for the Green Bay Packers. The one that I see being talked about a ton, though, and I want to get out of in front of right away, because I've seen a lot of discourse online in the last 24 hours, especially given his play yesterday, is Jair Alexander. Jalen Ramsey last year was traded. I think it was for 2 first-round picks when he was moved. So people are saying, why can't they just trade Jair? for that level of compensation. And yeah, I'll admit, Jair played terribly yesterday. We all agree there. And it's been a rough season for him, especially following the back injury. And if you really want to pile on, he looked like a guy at his locker room press conference yesterday. Jay Alexander looked like a guy who was on so many medications. It was unreal. It was like, if you haven't seen it yet, you can go look it up. One, it came off as very, not crass, but very, I don't know, stubborn in his answers. And not only that, but he had this kind of smirk on his face. It was truly bizarre. Jay Alexander's given some weird interviews in his life. This was perchance the most bizarre of all of them. So maybe he was drugged up. Who knows? But here's the deal with Jair. This is the reality. He's not holding up any hot young prospect that they want to get on the field. He himself is only 26 years old. He's not completely washed up. He was an all-pro last year. The return would be substantial for Green Bay, but so would the cost. Moving Jair now or in the offseason would incur about a $30 million dead cap charge in 2024. The cap issues for the Packers are finally beginning to lift a little bit next year. I'm not sure that they're going to want to pile on a new dead cap number, which is 75% of the Rodgers number that they had to carry through this year. Frankly, it's more likely that Jair Alexander gets placed on IR soon so that he can actually rest up and actually heal compared to what we saw yesterday, then they actually are going to move on from trading him. Number two, let's look at Preston Smith. Preston Smith showed up to the stadium yesterday in a Michael Myers costume for Halloween, and it turns out he had his best game of the year last year. I mean, after all, did you see him in coverage? But seriously, like, he came to life in a big way. He had multiple sacks that he was involved in, several impact plays, and there are lots of teams out there that could realistically use an impact veteran edge presence, especially one with multiple years remaining on his contract. If he's moved, the Packers could play younger players too, in the form of Kingsley Enagbare, LVN, Brenton Cox Jr. would even have to become a regular part of the rotation if Preston Smith was moved. And you got to ask the question, is he really part of the 2025 vision for the new contending window? Probably not, because by then he's going to be 33 under a contract that realistically doesn't make a whole lot of sense anymore. So everything seems pretty well aligned to trying to sell Preston Smith, except let's take a look at the money. Moving Preston Smith right now would probably ascertain about a mid-round selection, right? But it would drop about $14 million of dead cap money on the cap next year, while simultaneously only opening a couple $1 million to offset. Now, if you're wondering where I got these numbers, I pulled most of these from Spot Track. I know Over the Cap has slightly different numbers. If you follow Ken Ingalls on Twitter, he has slightly different numbers. So, I mean, everywhere's numbers are a little bit different right now, especially considering that it's also in season, but they're all ballparks. And you can see moving Preston Smith is going to cost them about $15 million next year, which again, the Packers may not be inclined to do. They could rework his contract to be more trade friendly, but you're asking for a lot to be done in about the next 22 hours. Another player that I see being talked about a lot, Rasul Douglas. He's probably playing the best football of his career. He's 28 years old. Current cap number of only about $4.4 million. He's got 1 year left on his contract. The cap next year jumps to about $11 million. And the dead cap is only about $7 million to move him. So from a financial standpoint, it's realistically possible to move on from Rasul Douglas. So let's look at the other things we have to evaluate and whether we want to move him or not. Is he holding up any hot young prospect? No, not really. Would the return be exceptional? I mean, maybe, because he's playing so well, it could net something like a day 2 pick, maybe, if he got multiple teams involved in, especially. But there's one factor here that I don't think they want to move on from. Rasul still being under contract for next year, as is Stokes, as Jair, Valentine, they're all under contract there next year. But to move a player like Rasul, who's playing his best football, may also signal to the team that we're also not planning on contending next year either, which doesn't exactly send the best message. And Rasul, for all intents and purposes, has become one of the undisputed leaders of the locker room. Cassidy Hill of Gannett Newspapers noted in the locker room yesterday that Rasul held court at his locker for about 30 minutes yesterday after the game. And he really didn't allow many excuses, writing off the youth thing, the injury thing. And during that time, several players stopped by the locker. One, to check on Razul. Two, to ask questions, have open conversation about what they could do better. And it's incredibly rare that you see that, especially while a guy is talking to reporters. It was noteworthy enough for Cassidy Hill to mention it several times. The other thing that the Packers probably really like about Rasul Douglas is he's really the only corner on the roster who shows more of a preference or skill set towards zone coverage than man. Jair, probably better in man. Stokes, proven he's better in man when he played. Valentine, better in press man especially. Rasul is your guy who plays more zone. Whether you keep Barry or not, it's still a lot. It's still going to be playing a lot of zone. It's a very large component of the modern NFL. So realistically, you need that unique skill set on the roster. Plus, you factored his leadership and what it may signal. I think Green Bay is going to want to hang on to Rasul. Looking at the next guy, too, Kenny Clark. Trading Kenny Clark is going to incur, just like others, about like $25 to $30 million in dead cap next year. His contract only has 1 year remaining. How could that possibly be? Well, Kenny Clark's contract is one of the most restructured contracts on the Green Bay Packers. He and David Bakhtiari, realistically, are the most restructured. Every single offseason, they have taken money and shoved it forward. And now what you've wound up with is a guy who's getting older. He's got 2 rookies behind him. He's got name recognition. Everything lines up to potentially trade Kenny Clark, except it's going to cost you a lot of money to do so. Frankly, I think a shorter term extension this offseason may be more on the table than actually trading Kenny Clark. So let's answer a couple comments here because I'm seeing them starting to pile up, and then I'll cover the last couple of guys before I jump out for today. Let's see. I don't want to scroll too back far, but let's see here. I see Chris is here. What's up, John? When I heard the Packers only rushed 2 players on defense, I was like, whoa, John's going to be pissed. Yes, Chris, you're right. I was. Yeah, I was very animated with my dad a couple times yesterday. Peter saying Packers should be sellers, then go tanking to get the highest spot in the draft 2024. By the way, I understand Jair Alexander can't seriously be traded, but his, I don't know, was quite concerning. It was, that's what I mean. It was a weird interview. Like, plus he had this weird smirk the entire time. Like, I don't wonder if he was drugged up to high heaven yesterday because it was bizarre even for Jair. So, Lee86 saying, hey, I'm cool with selling Jair or Kenny if the price is nice. Yeah, like I said, I think the only downside is the price the Packers would have to incur, and that's what I think really is going to be problematic. Ryan saying, hi, bro, who's to blame for Packers loose games? Losing and loose. Everyone and everything. I mean, I'm half joking. The truth is, almost every single play that the offense runs, someone massively screws it up, be it part of the protection plan, being a wide receiver straight up running the wrong route. There were several times yesterday where they ran run pass options, and before Jordan had even made his decision about running or passing, the wide receivers are already down the field blocking. There's one screenshot, if you can go find it on Twitter, of Jordan Love being fully dropped back, like 5 yards deep in the pocket, fully dropped back, ready to run. And not a single wide receiver is actually running a route because they're just chilling, blocking their guys because they all thought he was going to run. What do you even do with that level of just nonsense offensively, right? Defensively, realistically, they're doing enough. They're at least keeping the Packers in games. Yesterday was one of the performances that I got angrier at for sure, given their loose zones. But defensively, yeah, Joe Barry is partially to blame. But at the same time, yesterday notwithstanding, when guys go out there and miss 15 to 25 tackles, as they had done a couple times this year, you're never going to win. So then it's on the players. That's what I mean. It's everything. It's everywhere. It's the injuries. It's youth. It's all of it to a perfect storm of just bad play right now. And then Jeff saying, but hey, it is nearly Halloween, or was it Friday the 13th? There was a Friday the 13th this month, and it is nearly Halloween. Times are getting dark for the Green Bay Packers. So, a couple more guys here that I just wanted to give you quick assessments on whether you can expect to see them traded or not. These are at least guys that I've seen mentioned around the interwebs or in comments in the last couple of weeks with people asking, could they be moved? If the Packers sell, are these the guys to do it? So, figured I'd give you a little background. Let's cover the running backs together, Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon. In terms of a young guy waiting, yeah, Emmanuel Wilson is potentially waiting in the wings if they feel he's ready. Plus, you've got James Robinson now. If he's got any form of athleticism left following his Achilles injury, he's sitting on the practice squad. Okay, A.J. Dillon is in the last year of his deal. That's highly tradable. And Aaron Jones only has 1 year left on his deal, and it's a quite expensive year. So that's tradable as well. Moving on from Jones specifically, because his cap hit would being vacated next year would help even alleviate some of the dead cap they'd have to incur. So moving Aaron Jones is possible from a financial standpoint right now. Pair that with the fact that Matt LaFleur either hates Aaron Jones or loves him too much and wants to protect him because they never give him the ball. Yeah, there's a lot to consider here. Plus, a team acquiring Jones would have a fear of re-injury on that hamstring. He's on the cusp of 29 years old, which certainly is going to factor into their considerations as well. So, yeah, realistically, practically speaking, either one could be moved. Still, though, much in the category of Rasul, moving on from Jones kind of feels like you're just admitting we're not going to compete next year either. Pair that with the fact that Goot and LaFleur have talked to Jones as the engine of the team, the captain, the soul, the whatever word you want to use. He's that guy. I just have a hard time believing that they're going to move him. I have a hard time believing that they're even going to move him this coming offseason. I think Jones is here through the duration of his contract. As for Dillon, what kind of return do you expect to get for A.J. Dillon right now? Probably a day 3 pick. In which case, you got to ask, is he more valuable to the Packers finishing out the season? Or is that day 3 pick, maybe a 5th rounder, maybe 4th, is that more valuable than the rest of the tenure of A.J. Dillon? Lots of things to consider here. Maybe, but again, I don't think sending away a running back is the answer. Next would be Devondre Campbell, 30 years old, year removed from being an all-pro. They've sung McDuffie's praises while Campbell has been out. So maybe all that stuff seems to align. His cap number jumps. He's $5 million this year, $14 million next year. And his dead cap isn't really terrible. If they trade him, they'd incur about $10 million in dead cap next year. So all of that stuff seems to line up. But the question again, what's the return? Do you see a team out there offering a day 2 pick for an inside linebacker in the middle of a year, especially one who's coming off of an ankle injury? He makes calls for the defense, so they got to take that into account. An acquiring team would have to evaluate that. But overall, it's just a non-premium position. So even a contending team may not be willing to flip something like a 3rd round pick or a 2nd round pick for Devondre Campbell. So keep that in mind. And that's what I'm saying is the overall point. When you look up and down this Packers roster, offensively speaking, most of the guys are on rookie contracts. They're not going to get traded. They're part of the future vision. So you got to look for guys who aren't on rookie contracts. And then you got to dive into the money. Does it even make sense? And for most of the guys on 2nd contracts, it doesn't even make sense from a financial standpoint. My prediction is we're probably going to see another quiet trade deadline in Green Bay. Maybe we'll be wrong and they'll go make some barn burner of a trade and send away premium capital for some running back of the future. Maybe. It's possible. If they're going to be buyers, I already listed the only reason they should be buyers. But the truth is, they're realistically not going to be sellers either, because every single player you may want to sell probably has something attached to him that would stop the sale from occurring. So with that, let me just take on a couple more of these comments here before I jump for the day. And then I will be back Wednesday, 4:30. I'll do another live, that one dedicated solely to a Q&A. So hop on Wednesday at 4:30. If you got more questions, I'll be happy to hang out for a bit on Wednesday afternoon. Bucky Cheeseheads saying, if the offense can't stay on the field, the defense will be worn out eventually. It's true. Like that's indisputable. The concern or the problem that I have specifically yesterday, and I've defended Joe Barry enough. The thing that I really took issue with yesterday was the spacing of the zones. It's just inexcusable how often Viking receivers were so open. The gaps in the zone cannot be that large and actually be a successful defense. Earlier, I rattled off the stat about Kirk Cousins being over 50% on converting 3rd and 8s. That's just not good enough. And the players maybe executed the play call well enough, but if you're spaced out that far, what's the point? So something still has to change defensively for the defense to become one that dictates games. Dan saying, I prefer to move on from Jair. Good defenses, secondary players are great in run support. Yeah, and Jair, ever since his shoulder injury, like when he was younger, he would mix it up in the run game pretty aggressively. Then he suffered that shoulder injury, and he has been a different tackler since messing up his shoulder. You got to wonder if that still plays a part, if it's mental, like his subconscious says avoid that shoulder or something, right? You at least have to wonder. But Jair is 26 years old. Last year, he was an all-pro. Costs a fortune to move him. They need to dedicate resources to getting Jair right and maybe even putting him on IR or something to that effect before actually committing to sending him away. Pack fan, Iowa. Hey, man. Defense is playing good. They just end up tired because the offense cannot stay on the field. Yep, and the penalty skills. Yeah, penalties, you are spot on. The Packers are now number 1 in the NFL in penalties per game. And then if you divide that by like each type of penalty, like holding, false start, there's a bunch of those that independently they are number 1 at. A number of them stemming from the offensive line. But yeah, you ain't kidding. Penalties are just destroying any form of momentum this team ever built. Peter, if the Packers go 3-14 or 4-13, do you think Jordan Love will be QB1 in 2024? Oh, that's the big question, Peter. I've battled with this, and realistically, I think it's probably too early to say. The Packers are certainly doing their due diligence on the quarterbacks of the draft, but I think, too, let's say this, Jordan Love will be QB1 unless the only consideration here is the Packers potentially having a chance at Derek May or Caleb Williams. Those are the top 2 quarterbacks in this draft. And realistically, with the way things are shaping up, they're probably going to go picks number 1 and number 2. So that means the Packers that have to be in picks 1 and 2 or give a whole bunch of future stuff with their first rounder in order to get into 1 or 2. Plus, pair that with the fact that I don't think the Packers feel as though they've gotten an honest evaluation on Jordan Love. I mean, Matt LaFleur kind of mentioned the same today in his press conference, that assessing Jordan Love has been incredibly difficult because everything around him is such a hot mess. I'm inclined to say that, yes, Jordan Love is still QB1 24. Plus, I mean, keep in mind the contract, too. Even if they pick Caleb Williams, Jordan Love may still be like the transition guy, still be QB1 next year. Will he be QB1 next year? Yes. 2025, bigger question. Jeff saying just 2024, but the future QB will be getting drafted, and there are only 10 weeks, so this is his fate, and he wrote the script. Yeah, I think that's a bit harsh. Right now, he's trying to write a script in a book that's being ripped apart. So, I mean, like, look at yesterday, the interception, right? That interception is only credited to Jordan Love. Problem is, that's not a bad throw, and Jaden Reed just kind of handed the ball to the secondary member of the Vikings. It's just bad. It's bad all the way around. Lee 86, that completion made it 3rd and a foot or something, and they still celebrated. I don't know which one you're talking about there. And maybe this one. Insane to see Jair dab up Nixon after giving up like 7 yards. Okay. I don't know specifically which play you're mentioning, but yeah, the secondary was taking any chance to celebrate the small wins yesterday, and there even weren't many of those. Chris saying, John, I have to be honest with the Packers season this year is like opening up a Reese's cup, then it falls onto the floor. Still eat it anyway, man. 5-second rule. It's all good. Tyler, thank you for the super chat, man. Thank you. Tyler saying, how bad does it look for Goody to draft for the future with Rodgers on the team in 1920? And those classes have minimal impact, now lost Rodgers. It's not good. Ultimately, I think the larger context here matters a whole lot when assessing good. Right? When Jordan Love was chosen, in the 2020 draft. Yes, the Packers had just had a very, very successful 2019, but still, statistically speaking, in 2019, Rodgers looked like a far cry from his MVP self. And I know there's a lot of theories out there about, well, did drafting Love propel Rodgers back to being his MVP self? I mean, Love was chosen when Rodgers was still leading the NFL in throwaways in 18 and 19. So I think, the success of the 19 team kind of skews things a bit, because a lot of people felt like that 19 team, even though they rattled off all the wins, was vastly overrated. That they were a team that had tremendously overachieved in Matt LaFleur's first year. So the Packers were realistically having one eye to the future while having a 13-win team. And it was a very tight rope to walk that Gutekunst tried to do both at the same time. Then you advance a couple of years. Love isn't looking great whenever we see him. Rodgers has just won back-to-back MVPs. Then they issue Rodgers this massive contract during the summer of discontent. And it's there's a lot of talk about, well, did Brian Gutekunst even want to do it? Or did Mark Murphy force his hand? There's such a larger context and conversation to happen over the span of the last 4 years that this all occurred. At the end of the day, though, simply put, it is a negative look on the general manager because he tried to do both at the same time. He tried to transition to the future while supplying talent to a 13-win team. And then all of a sudden, their Super Bowl window gained a lot more legitimacy when Rodgers started playing like an MVP again. And yet he had already gotten some pieces for the future. And it became a debacle from a roster building standpoint. And what we're seeing now is the consequences. One thing you can say rather unequivocally is Brian Gutekunst did have a couple years there where his drafts were certainly deficient. Had they been better drafts, even this year's team may be looking a lot better with the development of third and fourth year players, which we are not seeing really at all. This team seems to have a gap between its first and second year guys who are way too young and then fifth and sixth year vets. There's a couple year gap there, which is really hurting the team. So to put it short, yeah, it's a bad look. But there's a much larger conversation as to why it occurred and just how bad it should be used to judge him, I guess is what I would say. Lee 86, don't need to draft a QB. Go get a left tackle. The way it's going, we might have a shot at Fashanu. Yeah, or even Joe Alt, right? It's going to be, I think, realistically, if things stay the way that they are, let's say that, because there is a possibility, let's not discount the possibility. It may look far-fetched right now, but there is a world where the Packers click, where the offense gets on the same page and starts to look functional, where Matt LaFleur starts to call plays for the guys that he has, not the guys that he wants. There is room yet in the season for them to begin to turn it around, which may very well change the draft trajectory as well. So I would keep that in mind. My thing right now is Jordan Love has not been given a fair shake. He has not been given an honest assessment as to whether he can be an honest quarterback or not. You can say a couple things with certainty. When he has confidence, when he trusts his line, he can throw with anticipation. We haven't seen it the last couple of weeks because he's probably really getting sick of getting knocked around from his offensive line. And he still continues to throw contested catch balls in spite of his team being bottom in the NFL in terms of actually catching contested catch balls. And his run game's been broken. Let's just throw that on too. So my personal thing is right now, I probably wouldn't draft a quarterback unless you have a shot at someone that you believe is absolutely positively generational and is guaranteed to be a successful franchise quarterback. I think Love needs an honest, fair shake with competent wide receiver play and an offensive line that can actually protect him. Dan, I think the Packers are soft. LaFleur is a player's coach. Yeah, LaFleur is a player's coach, but the soft thing, I guess what I say here is I look at last year's team, a vet team, a team that had no fire. And I was calling constantly last year, Dan, you were here. I was calling constantly last year for the Packers need to get angry. No more of this Aaron Rodgers relax. No more of this inevitably we're going to be fine. They got to get pissed and go out there and actually hit the other team. This year, they just got to run the right routes. Like they got to stay in their correct zone, follow the right guy, and my God. Like, that's the thing. I don't look at this year's team and go, well, what they need is a batch of aggression. If they were pissed, they'd be winning games. Like, nah, they'd be running around violently instead of just running around unintelligently. So I get your sentiment, but yeah, I differ a little bit there. Scott saying it seems Kenny Clark is way overrated and not worth his contract. Yeah, I'm not going to lie. Kenny's been a bit disappointing this year. He did have a better game against Minnesota, as he generally does. He normally performs very well against Minnesota. But there was a few week stretch there where Kenny Clark kind of seemingly disappeared. And not paid to disappear. That's for sure. I would say overall his play has been substandard this year to this point. But again, plenty of time to turn that around. And as I detailed, whether we believe Kenny Clark is vastly overpaid or not, doesn't really matter because that contract is really, really hard to get out of with how much money they've pushed forward. Again, I think it was like 30 million dead cap next year if they move on from Kenny Clark. So look, lots and lots and lots of things to consider with the Packer franchise right now. Like I said, if something huge comes up tomorrow with the trade deadline, I will hop on to a Q&A. If not, Wednesday Q&A, 4:30 for sure. I'll be here. The one thing that I want to add is if you want to fix the Green Bay Packers, like not this week, not win the game next week. I'm saying organizationally speaking, you want to begin to fix the Packers? Matt LaFleur and Brian Gutekunst probably need to get on the same page about what kind of team they want to have together. Because right now, Matt LaFleur's offense isn't for the players he's got. And who supplied the players? Brian Gutekunst. Matt LaFleur constantly calling halfback dives when he's got pass protecting IOL and not run maulers in there. It's nonsense. Utilizing Luke Musgrave on 2-yard outs and as a blocker, when in actuality, he should pretty much exclusively be running up the seam. Inappropriate use of a player. Or even how he's handling Jordan Love. Can't say I agree with that much either. So there probably needs to be a real talk about, Matt, you need to start coaching the team you have. And then Matt rebutting with, it's not the team I want. And some things really need to get on the same page there organizationally before it seems that this team really gets itself fixed. By the way, I'm also going to say too, because obviously there's a lot of talk right now about Matt LaFleur and everybody losing their jobs. I would just say, like, I believe firmly that Matt LaFleur and Brian Gutekunst are safe next year. If it's this bad again for all of next year, yeah, then we have that talk. But I got to believe LaFleur and Brian Gutekunst are very safe moving into next year. As for the coordinators and position coaches, I don't think that's safe at all. I do think we could see a house cleaning around Matt LaFleur this year and get a lot of new bodies in that way. Could see that. Let me just let me jump in. I got 2 more comments here and then I will get out of here for the day. Jeff saying, nothing has changed the past 5 weeks. Why think things will change the next 10 weeks? This is what we have. Nothing will change. Jeff, change is inevitable. We know that in every single walk of life. But the other thing that I would say too is it won't take much for something to click. You have young players, right? They are learning, even in their failures, whether they look better in a given week or worse in a given week. They are learning something. And all it's going to take is something to click together. You know, it's not like they're just going to throw for 50 more yards every week until suddenly they're all Pro Bowlers. Something's got to click together, and it may come. And Matt LaFleur may change his play calling style next week. Maybe he walks into the game saying, screw it, we're going no huddle every play. We don't know because we're not in control. But something will change. We just don't know what. There is hope for it to be better. Dan saying the Packers don't need any more 11 to 13 player draft classes, especially if their coaches can't coach the players up. Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with that. That's really good for when you're looking to supply depth, or you're just throwing darts at a dartboard and hoping you find a couple special players, which is kind of what I think last year's draft was. A young team, let's just get as many bodies in here as we can and see if we can hit on one. Yeah, I am inclined to agree there. Lee86 saying soft feels right for the defense. They're purely reactionary, just playing assignment football, hoping for mistakes, but not allowed to make plays. Lee, there, I agree with you very much. Yes. I still don't know if I'd use the word soft, but uh, they are a reactionary defense. They're not a dictating defense. Philosophically speaking, that's how they're built. They're bend but don't break. This is a defense that's realistically built to play with a lead. That's kind of the Fangio style, honestly. But it's not what this team needs right now. And then Jeff saying Murphy retires after next year. Don't fool yourself. Yeah, I know. I know. Mandatory retirement, age 70 for Mark Murphy. I also think the involvement of Mark Murphy on the football side is vastly overrated by a lot of fans. Like ever since they did that restructure where he like is the top of the pyramid and Gutekunst answers to him and LaFleur answers to him. Yeah, I don't think Murphy's sitting there calling the shots though. I really, really don't. I don't. I think Mark Murphy's involvement in the football side of things is really overestimated by a lot of folks. And I don't think handing things over to his protege and Ed Policy is going to bring out a whole lot of change. And it looks by all accounts, Ed Policy is the guy who's going to be taking over. So, all right, everybody, I am out of here. Go enjoy the night. I'll be back Wednesday, 4:30, an entire episode dedicated just to a Q&A, and then Friday previewing Packers versus Rams. So everybody, go have a good night. Go hug a loved one. Go enjoy something that isn't Packers football for a little while because it's not that enjoying right now. But go have a good night. And as always, go Pack Go.